Alright, it's time to show off the video quality on the Galaxy S4. Now, as we all know, Samsung enjoys a substantial resolution advantage compared to many other smartphones out there with a 13 megapixel shooter on the back of this gorgeous little phone. But when it comes to shooting video, 1080p is definitely the flavor of the day. As for video coming off of the Galaxy S4, as you can see, it's very detailed. And thankfully, Samsung's camera module doesn't fight for focus quite as aggressively as some other cameras that we've recently tested. HTC One, I'm looking in your general direction. That being said, Samsung does have a tendency to overexpose, especially when reds are on the screen. When the subject of your video is predominantly red, I really do wish Samsung would give us the ability to control saturation. And as you can see here, moving into a flower macro, colors are much more natural, far more realistic. And moving around this frame, you can see how detailed and crisp the video quality is off of this camera. So here's a quick comparison when it comes to video movement. Whenever you have to take video and move around with the camera at the same time. The Galaxy S4 does not include any kind of optical image stabilization, though in the video settings, there is a setting for electronic image stabilization. And what this basically does is it crops in the middle of the frame to compensate for any of your movement to smooth out the shakiness in the frame. Of course, this does seem to degrade video quality ever so slightly. And the Galaxy S4 doesn't have one of the widest lenses we've seen, so you lose out on even a little bit more of the wide-angle view. As you can see, employing electronic image stabilization does help smooth out some of that jostling, although there is a very unnatural wiggle or a buzziness to the frame. It's at least a little bit better than the twitchy shakiness of the non-image stabilized video. Alright, moving into a traffic scene, and you can see this camera does a very good job of dealing with movement as cars drive by in front of this lens. I'm also very impressed with the dynamic range off of this camera. This is bright, harsh, noonday sun, and we're still getting very clear elements of the sky being blue and colors in the cars, and nothing's clipped or overexposed. And it stands on par with cameras like the Nokia Lumia 920. Of course, returning from the Galaxy Note 2 is the fantastic slow motion video feature. This, of course, drops quality down to 720 by 480, but it's a pretty handy effect and it's a lot of fun to play with. The fast forward video feature makes a return as well. You have to hold the camera for a really long time to get video out of this feature. Every 1 second here represents 8 seconds in real life. Now on to a transition test. The Galaxy S4 does a phenomenal job of transitioning from light to dark and from dark to light, blooms very pleasantly, and again, as you can see, this is pretty great dynamic range. Even though parts of that truck are a little bit clipped, you can still see plenty of detail in the highlights. What's maybe not as impressive is indoor lighting. This microphone is being lit by 2 different interior sources, the equivalent of 3 60-watt light bulbs. The ISO is cranked up to compensate, detail gets a little smeary, and the camera's starting to have difficulty locking onto the microphone in the middle of the frame. It's on interior lighting where we can start to see the potential disadvantages of having 13 million pixels on such a small image sensor. And even trying to hold very steady, you can still see some very unpleasant shakiness in this video. So going back to turning on electronic image stabilization, we can see how much more of the frame we actually lose on this mixer. And while it's doing a decent job of smoothing out my hand movements, it's really not that pleasant an image. And showing an extreme case of something we wouldn't normally push our smartphones to do, this is that same microphone from before lit by the equivalent of 1 candle light. The Galaxy S4 is struggling to resolve any kind of image in this kind of a scenario. So moving on to a more reasonable scenario, here's a nighttime street scene. Again, we see great dynamic range. The camera's doing a very nice job of tracking movement. The ISO is cranked, so some of the night sky is a little grainier, but it's not altogether unpleasant. And moving over into some neon lights, when the camera is properly exposing for this lighting, there are moments where you can even start to make out the individual neon tubing on each of these letters. It's pretty remarkable performance. All in all, this is a very respectable upgrade over the 8 megapixel shooter that we saw on the Galaxy Note 2, especially in good lighting situations. Unfortunately, the camera does seem to struggle just a little bit more with dim and indoor lighting scenarios. Plus, whenever the camera is jostled or moved, I can't say the effect is very pleasant. And to see by just how much, the next video we produce will be pitting the Galaxy S4 directly against the HTC One. So come on back for that, guys, and as always, thanks for watching.